Ladies and gentlemen, our MLA, Jordan Sturdy.
Thanks, Mo. Thanks, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Lil'wat and the Squamish Nation. One thing that was missed in that bio was I had the privilege of being British Columbia's shortest-serving Minister of the Environment as well. And I've been involved in local government and in the politics for quite a long time now, since the early 2000s. But I think I also represent what many of you represent and many other people who live in this community, in that I moved up here from Vancouver, up from the city, because I wanted a different lifestyle. I didn't want to work in an office. I wanted to be outside as part of what I did every day. And moved up here, really not really understanding where I was going. Ended up working for Whistler Blackcomb as a professional ski patroller. Worked for the BC Ambulance Service. Ended up as buying a piece of property in Pemberton, because interestingly, and you'd appreciate this, a Gothic and Emerald was the same price as 60 acres, a barn, a mobile home, and the piece that really sold me was a tractor. Because what young man in his 20s doesn't want to have a tractor? So that led me into the business of agriculture, which I wasn't really expecting to do. I wasn't expecting to be there. But that, interestingly, that has really evolved from a basic agricultural operation into a much more sophisticated one and a public one, which created an opportunity for people to understand me and who I was, or at least think they did, and encouraged me to enter politics in first of all the Pemberton Valley Diking District, which is a small local government authority, a taxation authority, but that was really self-interest, having experienced a number of floods in the Pemberton Valley, and I thought, well, I'm paying Diking taxes and I'm not getting protected. I need to do something about this. Still get flooded, but anyway. And that led into local government, where I had the opportunity to serve as the mayor of Pemberton, and it's been a bit of a transition. It's very interesting. I didn't really expect to be here. It wasn't the life plan. Life it can be certainly interesting. So, where I represent now, West Vancouver-Sea to Skye. It's an amazing riding. It is a microcosm of British Columbia. Starts in Cypress Bowl, essentially West Vancouver, Bowen Island, Lions Bay, Britannia, Squamish, Whistler, Pemberton, up to the Hurley, up to the Duffy, Darcy. And this last election was changed to go down actually now to Harrison, to 20 Mile Bay on Harrison. So it's a big riding, about 14,000 square kilometers, about 52,000 people. Very diverse, but also representing much of what British Columbia is. It's a very, very diverse province, and the riding is equally diverse. In West Vancouver-Sea to Skye, transportation infrastructure of a variety of sources is key to the economy. Helmut mentioned the highway. I'm going to mention it a number of more times and how it has changed our world in many ways. The fact that we have a Class 1 railway running through the middle of the riding, servicing one of the only ports in Canada, well, certainly the only port in British Columbia not managed by the federal government. It's a provincial port, the port of Squamish. We have various different air access opportunities and rail, highway, and ports, as I said. Manufacturing has always been a big part of the Sea to Skye. Certainly focused in Squamish on the forest sector. That has changed. There's still a manufacturing opportunity. It's still there in many ways, and there's a desire to see it expanded and come back to some degree. But and I'm speaking now in terms of the mills that used to be in Squamish, Interfor, and the wood fiber pulp mill and this sort of thing, which is gone. But certainly the forest sector remains a key part to the communities up and down this corridor. Energy, and then in terms of manufacturing, I think we all understand the opportunity for recreation technology, for recreation manufacturing, for other food and beverage manufacturing. Beer manufacturing seems to be a very popular endeavor these days, up and down the corridor. So there's great opportunity there as well. In terms of energy, many don't understand that we are actually probably the densest piece of renewable energy population in Canada, this riding, with the renewable energy projects up and down the riding, and there's tremendous more potential as well, especially with baseload for geothermal potential. As I mentioned, forestry, obviously agriculture is something I have a particular interest in, and we're seeing it change from Spud Valley in Pemberton to a valley that has hops, that has blueberries, that has just the range of opportunity in Pemberton in terms of agriculture is almost unlimited, and I think there's also good opportunity in the Squamish Valley. Service sector is a key part to this region as well. Healthcare, education, and food services, other services, construction and development. In British Columbia, it amounts to about 20-some-odd% of our GDP is construction and development, and all you people. That is equally true here in Sea to Sky, and then the tech sector and the future of the tech sector and the ability to work remotely, work and contribute in a way that allows you to still have a unique personal experience. So populations, what has happened over the years? Certainly since the last census, Pemberton's population has grown 6%, Squamish's 14% growth. Whistler's hit over 20% growth. But there is, I think, and Mike will probably speak to this later, but there's certainly caps, there's limits in places, we all understand. But on either side in Squamish and Pemberton, those don't exist. So I think Helmut mentioned the issue of where people are commuting, and that was I think something we all are beginning to understand and appreciate, the challenges that communities like Squamish face and the challenges that our infrastructure is going to face. So where do we, I think Helmut did a great job pointing out where we've been in terms of the recession, the bumpiness of our economy and development. And it always struck me as odd. I expected, as we all lived through that Sea to Sky highway upgrade, we all saw what opportunity this was going to bring. We could see how it wasn't going to be the highway of death any longer, as it was so called. But it was going to be a much different experience, and it would allow more people to experience and come to the Sea to Sky. But it's... I expected, post-2010, the minute that highway was finished, the minute the Olympics were over, that if you were in downtown Vancouver, an hour east, you could be in Surrey. An hour west, you could be in Squamish. Well, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Really? But, so what happened, though? 2011... didn't really happen. 2012, 2013, wasn't until 2014 that things started to really begin to pick up. 2015, things went a little bit crazy, and now that's all we obsess about is house prices and occupancy and access to labor. So it's been an interesting number of years, certainly. The highway clearly was the game changer, no question about it. We looked at it in the bid book for the Olympics. Many of you will know, looked at various alternatives, boats, trains. What's the best investment here? Well, that $700 million investment in the highway, I don't know that anybody, well, most people would not criticize it particularly. It deals with good movement, deals with people, deals with other recreational opportunities. Look at the Grand Fondo would not be an event without that highway. But it also it creates challenges for us. It brings people here, it challenges our capacity, and it's something we certainly need to pay attention to. It has had recently certainly an impact on affordability. Around that proximity to the Lower Mainland. It allows people to live in this place, to have a recreation lifestyle. It puts pressure on government services, which we've tried to respond to over the years. Things like opening up a second operating room in the Squamish Hospital. The OBGYN in Squamish, they have doubled the number of births in a year in Squamish. Doubled. These are just unprecedented numbers in many ways. To touch briefly on tourism, as Helmut mentioned, the sector is certainly thriving. 5.5 million visits came to British Columbia in 2016, 11% increase year over year. It looks like we'll see higher than 11% for 2017. It's forecasted almost $16 billion in revenues, interest from all around the world, for a variety of different reasons. But certainly international access, jet access, the fuel tax reductions, this sort of thing is certainly helping. 130,000 people work in the tourism sector across the province, almost 20,000 businesses. It's interesting because there's a perception that tourism is a low-paid job. But it depends on the rest of your circumstances. If we look, I hope all of everybody's familiar with this. You're all familiar with this vital statistics report for Whistler. Great, really interesting reading, very valuable publication. But it was really interesting to me to note that in Whistler, there is for the low income defined family, the provincial average is around, Canadian average is 17%, provincial average here in British Columbia is 19%. The definition, those people that fit into that low income definition in Whistler, 11% in a tourism-based economy. So why is that? I think it's something worth noting. And I would attribute much of it to the policy that the RMOW has pursued over the course of the last 20 years around housing. Around the work that the WHA has done, and recognizing that we need to have in place a policy objective to strive for. And that is, in this case, as you all know, that it's retaining 70% of your workforce in your community. In the case of Whistler, we've been successful in exceeding that. But it's a policy objective that is absent in most other communities around the province. And I can cite example after example after example where people will hammer me in the chest about affordability, and then when I say, well, where you have this hundreds of millions of dollars development, what is your amenity? What does your density bonusing bylaw say? What are you doing with money from that? Well, we're going to improve the park. Well, have you considered an employee-restricted housing opportunity? Well, no. Why not? Well, because the developers didn't want to do it. Okay, well, there's a policy objective that is missing, and you're never going to get where you need to go without having a plan, and many communities don't. So a few more tourism numbers, which many of you maybe recognize or understand already. Certainly, regional visits remain key. The regional market in Whistler, 43% of the regional market is in the winter, in the winter, 43% of the market. Washington, British Columbia. In the summertime, 55%. I think we all understand that. Core markets, Canada, United States, UK, Australia, secondary and growing, Germany, Mexico, Japan, Alberta and Texas. They have that at least together in my notes here. I thought that was kind of funny. And then obviously emerging markets, China, India, Brazil, and Quebec. And of course, the number that we all know, Whistler contributes 25% at minimum, maybe more, of new money, external money coming into this province as a result of tourism. A phenomenal number. And I also have to take at this time recognize, I think, or suggest that my belief is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And when we add Squamish, well, Horseshoe Bay, Squamish, and Pemberton to that overall picture, you know, I think that number is bigger than that, because we are people come to Squamish specifically to come to Squamish, and Pemberton, of course, you know, right? Key international destination. Consumer spending, 1.53 billion towards the provincial GDP, a not inconsequential number at all. And Whistler supports 15,000 jobs, which is a 10% increase since 2012. The province does contribute back into this, into Whistler through the resort municipality, the RMI, or Resort Municipality Initiative funding. It's to help, the principle is to help this community maintain the quality of experience for guests and residents, but the focus is guests, because to have the taxpayers of this community, the 12,000 people who live here, pay for the infrastructure and the experience for the up to 60,000 people that are here on a weekend is not realistic. So there needs to be a mechanism to bring money back in, to, as the mayor tells me, to, you know, when we have the thousands of people in the Olympic Oval and or the Olympic Plaza, and they all leave, and somebody's got to go scrape the gum off the sidewalk, and it shouldn't be the local taxpayers' dollars, and I think we certainly agree with that. There's just no question, though, that we need to find a better mechanism. The way it's set up right now, there's too much uncertainty, there's too much competition, and it's not a performance-based return, and I think there's certainly, we continue to work on looking for a better structure for that. Growth certainly means opportunity for entrepreneurs. There's no shortage of them. This is, and I think we saw that reflected in one of the slides, a small business here in Whistler. I recall from one of the chamber presentations that there's 600 small businesses that are members of the chamber in Whistler. That's a phenomenal number for a community of this size of population. But small business drives Whistler, small business drives British Columbia. And there's all sorts of opportunity here, all sorts of different businesses. I think we all know many of them, be it in recreation or guiding, certainly transportation services, or many small businesses associated with that, recreation tech, manufacturers and designers of outdoor equipment, and then of course F&B, service and production. As well, and many people focus on this, I don't know how big the sector actually is, but remote workers, people who come here, live here, work here, but in fact work remotely, and so they can decide on whether they want to go skiing or they want to go to work. And I'm actually, I have to applaud all of you for coming today, recognizing what's outside. But so what does this all mean, though? What are the impacts? What are the effects? And I think we've all seen the pressure, haven't we? You know, capacity is perceived to be at maximum at times. The focus for us is, as government, is often the key. It seems to be the highway. This is where I get much feedback, is the highway. But a decision was made a long time ago, both internally here in Whistler, but fundamentally for the Sea to Sky Highway. We would need to remember it is a two-lane highway, one lane in either direction, with a series of passing lanes. And it's just, it is the way it is. When we have situations, or we have circumstances where you've got 25 or 30 kilometers of two lanes heading south, pinch point at Britannia Beach or Darrell Bay, two lanes going to one lane, everybody's, well, and 99% of the time, actually 98% of the time, not an issue. But the focus comes on that 2% of the time, which tends to be on Friday night and Sunday afternoon, coincidentally. So, but it is a limited, the message is it's a highway of limited capacity. So we have to look at alternatives. We are looking at working with the RMOW, MOTI, in terms of looking at what it might look like here to put an alternating lane in Whistler, to Stanley Park Causeway type of installation. Hopefully we'll have a look at that over the course of the summer and see what that would mean, what that would take. We also have to recognize that they have other uses, so there's not just cars and trucks, but there's also recreational uses on the highway in terms of cycling and that type of tourism infrastructure. So, there's always demands and desire to make safety improvements, but they all come, and I think we all agree that this is important, but they come with compromises in terms of limiting capacity. We've looked at other areas, other issues, bigger issues, the Sunshine Coast fixed link assessment, which has informed the conversation, which that should probably quiet that conversation for a while. The ferries, and that's an ongoing discussion, and happy to talk about that at another time if one would like. Trains are a constant desire for people to, why don't we have a train? Why don't we have a train, everybody says? Well, because it needs to compete on time, it needs to compete on location, and it needs to compete on cost. And at this point, it does none of those things. But there's an initiative right now where in fact the governor of Washington State was in the legislature in the fall talking about a variety of things, but one of those things he's pushing and in cooperation with the province is the development of a rail link between Seattle and Vancouver. And we've been talking about how this might integrate with services to the North Shore, because we all recognize that the North Shore has significant congestion issues, both getting across the Sound as well as going east-west, and how that whole conversation might come together with another reassessment, an updating of the assessment done in the early 2000s around the train, and what other technologies are available. Could we look at light rail as opposed to high-speed rail? What does that actually look like? How can this all integrate together? So the conversation is not dead. I think it's fair to say at this point that it doesn't look particularly, I'm not hugely optimistic about it just based on the cost. But so all of this, transportation issues tied to housing issues. Mentioned the work that Whistler has done. I can't say enough about it. It's not perfect. We all know that. But without those initiatives, without those policy objectives, we would not be nearly as successful as we are here. On the supply side, certainly Pemberton and Whistler, that's where the focus is. BC Housing in the province of British Columbia looks at more at vulnerable populations. How do we deal with vulnerable populations? The typical model is, we say, for just to use some basic numbers, say the cost of a project is $1 million. The population can afford to pay for operations and a mortgage of up to $500,000. The province would come in through BC Housing, work with a nonprofit or an operator, and drop that $1 million cost down to the $500,000, so buy down the mortgage essentially, to create a sustainable development. And that's what the province has done, working with working with WHA in Cheakamus and other places around the communities, including in Pemberton, where the focus has been on seniors. So certainly more work to do. That's been the focus up until now. Otherwise, there's huge development opportunities and pressures which create issues in a variety of places. Furry Creek is only 20% built out. Britannia Beach has a potential for at least another 1,000 units, and I know the developers would likely like to see more. The oceanfront, 4,000 or 5,000 units potentially in Squamish. Garibaldi at Squamish, a project that many will oppose, but others will very much support. There's a public hearing, I understand, from the regional district down at Squamish in a couple of weeks on that project, but that original proposal was 22,000 bed units. But the RGS's objective is to limit sprawl and cluster development. And then, of course, there's a variety of different development opportunities in Pemberton. So but really, this provides, you build it and they will come. They are coming. The forecast is good. I would I defer to Helmut, but clearly the direction is positive economically, development-wise, but it comes with development pressures. It comes with capacity issues, and we've all seen it in Joffrey Lakes. We have a parking lot, and we see 20, 30 cars and a couple of dozen people. Then the Twitter reference that Mo made, I think, is very germane. A little Instagram, a Facebook, and we go from 20 or 30 cars and a couple of dozen people to 600 cars, and we have a counter on there. 2,500 people walk that trail in one day. One day. So, and I am as conflicted as everybody. So, what's the solution? Oh, 1,000 car parking lots, some people would say. Well, I can't concur with that, but at the same time, I wouldn't mind having 1,000 car parking lot and having every one of those people stop at my farm on the way to and from, Joffrey Lake. So this is a balancing act that we need to understand, because at the end of the day, it's about the quality of the experience that the people who live here have, and equally the quality of the experience that the people who visit here have. And that's our job. That's my job, certainly, to help steward that, to make sure we make the right decisions, till we understand how much is enough. And we have a variety of different initiatives provincially to work on this, the cumulative effects assessment framework, which monitors values, environmental values, to make sure the trends are going in the right direction. That we look at capacity. We're doing a recreational opportunities analysis to look at recreational capacity on the landscape here in the Sea to Sky. Another example was the fact that we had to put in place a reservation system for Garibaldi Park. You cannot go and camp in Garibaldi Park without a reservation now. That's just the reality. It didn't used to be that way, but if you don't have that, you get conflict and you get overuse, and we need to manage that. So we don't have a drawbridge. And many would never advocate for one. But when Squamish is forecasted to double in population in the next 20 years, and that may come before 20 years, impacts to all our quality of lives are going to be affected. So something that we have to focus on. So thank you very much.
Can you talk about, it's a two-part question, we've seen the minimum wage hike in Ontario, and we're so dependent on small businesses here. Do you see that being an issue for the current government? And second, what legislation or policy do you think is coming down the pipe from the current government that would have the biggest detrimental impact on our region here?
Excellent questions. In terms of the minimum wage, we are on, the province has said, the government has said that we are on track to minimum $15 wage, minimum wage. What's the timeline on that? They had talked, I think 2020 was the time. Whether that is amended or not remains to be seen. I'm not sure here in Whistler that it's going to make a big difference to us, to tell you the truth. I don't know that there's very many employers who actually rely on minimum wage. There are clearly some, but given a reasonable horizon, I think the impacts will be minimal. In terms of legislation, I think that's or what's the initiatives of government, that's a great question. It's certainly one we've all been speculating on. We're going back to the House in a couple of weeks. There'll be the throne speech on the 13th, I believe, and then budget probably a week after that. I cannot see that the province will not act on, specifically on the housing issue. If the NDP government says, oh, I don't know, I think the market can sort itself, I'd be real surprised if that's going to happen. We've seen Mr. Weaver speculating on all sorts of things, from expansion of the foreign buyers tax to incorporate the whole province, to a prohibition on foreign ownership in the province of British Columbia, which fortunately Premier Horgan has rejected at this point. But to a vacancy tax on the province as well. I certainly don't support any of those things. I think that we should enable some of it in the way that we enabled Vancouver to put in place a vacancy tax. It has to be, it seems to me, up to the community to find the circumstances that fit for the community, to make it work for the community, because Vancouver is not Williams Lake, is not Whistler. And we need to find homegrown solutions, but enable communities to do that. One of the ideas that I certainly support is looking at the property tax structure. Right now, for residential anyway, there's one classification. It's residential. But to break that down a little bit, to say there's one A, B, C, D, E, and give different multiples for different types of housing, so to help communities incentivize certain types of housing. So maybe you give a break to multifamily, or whatever, but give some flexibility there. It does require that the community charter be opened up, which is a bit of a can of worms, or a Pandora's box, I think is probably a better description. But certainly I suspect that there will be some action around housing, and I think we can't underestimate what the unintended consequences may be. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time.